the Porsche 911, the Jaguar F-Type, the Ferrari Roma and the Aston Martin DB11. All currently on sale, all in some way, shape or form, excellent cars. But if you're on the hunt for a daily drivable, sporty GT car, there is one that is criminally overlooked, the Lexus LC500. Today, I'm going to give you 5 reasons why this car is worth your time and may just be worth your money too. The LC500 and I have crossed paths a few times. I first got to drive one a number of years ago at a motor industry event. Then I got to review one in the United States, before finally doing a proper review here in Britain with the convertible last year. This is the first time I've actually driven a coupe properly on British roads. And notably, though the car has now been around for a few years, the 2021 model year did bring a few significant updates. Revisions were made across the board to things like the steering, the gearbox, the suspension and the interior. The idea being this car is now more dynamic when you want it, more comfortable when you don't, has more tech that you need and is generally a little bit more livable. However, it's still very much the same car it always was, including many of its key strengths, which brings me onto point number 1. This engine. The fitment of a petrol particulate filter has cost it a few horsepower over the outgoing one, but it remains characterful and exciting. The truth is, here in Europe, the idea of a naturally aspirated V8 is no longer a dying one, it's essentially dead. So the fact you can not just buy a car with this kind of engine, but have it be brilliant, is nothing short of a miracle. Yes, there is also a hybrid available, the confusingly named LC500H with a 3.5 litre V6. But when you can buy this, why would you have that? And indeed, about 3/4 of Lexus LC500 customers have seen the light and bought the V8. And what a power plant it is. 5 litres, 464 horsepower, just shy of 400 pound-foot of torque, about 530 newton meters, and it revs to 7,300 RPM. Granted, they may not be numbers to impress in the day and age of turbocharging. Even when new, this car was hopelessly outgunned by its rivals. But that was never what made this so special. Instead, it was the way it felt, the way it sounded, and the way it went. This is a proper old-school engine. Because it is naturally aspirated, even with tighter regulations and the particulate filter in it, it sounds amazing. Yes, the car may look very Tokyo, but the noise at the back is pure Talladega. I'm sure there are also plenty of people that will be put off by this engine, having been used to the massive turbocharged torque you get from today's power plants. Below about 4,000 RPM, this is relatively lethargic. But there is also a real reward for your perseverance, because get it to that 4,000 RPM mark and it goes feral. The rush from 4 to 7 is addictive. As somebody who wishes to be considered a serious motoring journalist, but is also at heart a car fan, I find myself caught between 2 different trains of thought. On the one hand, every new car should be harder, faster, stronger, better than the one it replaces. But on occasion, that sometimes means nothing at all, and a car can simply be enough. And trust me, this is enough. Point number 2, just look at it. It's sensational, particularly here in this fading evening light and a stunning shade called Blazing Carnelian, easily the best name for a colour ever. It's striking. I don't actually know if it's a beautiful car or not. I've been looking at them for years and I still cannot make my mind up. What is certain though, is you're not really going to mistake it for anything else. Sure, there are a couple of typical Lexus touches like the spindle grille up front, but beyond that, the LC is very much its own thing. You take a 911 and park it somewhere, people won't notice, even if it's a very special one, because it's just a Porsche. The same really goes for an Aston Martin. They blend in. The Jaguar F-Type has now been around for so long, people don't know whether it's new or old anymore. The LC500 is a talking point and a half. You know what's even more amazing? Strictly speaking, this is the successor to the SC430. Yeah, that one. And I think we can all agree, styling-wise, this is a far more successful car. Actually, The rest of it is a far more successful car too, and you've got the feeling with this that it really is something truly special. As it happens, Japanese performance cars are never a given. BMW bring out a new version of the 3 Series, and you know, at some point there will be an M3. Porsche announce a new 911, you know, to the day when the turbo is going to be released, and the GT3, and so on and so forth. But the Japanese don't always seem that fussed about any sort of continuity. Honda have gone years without building a single Type R. A Lexus F model is never a given. Sadly, there is unlikely to be a sporty variant of the LC500, but as it stands, I think it has enough qualities to still appeal to the person that would generally go for the sportier variant. When you consider the rest of the Lexus range, cars chiefly aimed at the American market with hybrid powertrains, CVT gearboxes, big SUVs, that sort of thing, you begin to realise just how amazing it is that this car exists at all. I have this vision in my head of the Lexus office where you can see many people diligently working through the night. And then if you look just a little bit closer, you realise there's nobody in that office. What you've got is a bunch of pillows with suits on, tied to chairs with smiley faces drawn on them, because everybody's snuck off to the local drift event. Those are the people, I think, behind this, because it's filled with passion. And this brings me on to point number 3. The interior. It's all well and good having an exterior that's wild and wacky, but if your interior fails to match, then that's no good. The old Aston Martins were beautiful inside, but beginning to feel their age. The new ones somehow feel both lower quality and also older. Not sure how they managed that one. The new 992 Generation 911 is a weird fusion of awkward retro throwbacks and simply frustrating design choices. This is spectacular. I remember the first time I ever sat in an LC500, and it's one of the first times I remember sitting in a car and just going, wow, this will make you Owen Wilson or your money back. And you know something? The last few years have done nothing to diminish the effect. It's sensational. Where do you even begin? Nothing in here has really changed all that much, bar the fact the screen up here now supports Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. It's still operated by this trackpad here, which I know a lot of people hate. But truth is, give it 5 minutes, you'll get used to it, and you'll realise it's a much better way of doing things than a touchscreen. Safer, and saves you getting annoying fingerprints all over your screens. The shapes in here are beautiful. These flowing lines that run from one side of the cabin to the other are spectacular. This also does the sort of windowsill effect thing far better than the 911. Everywhere you look and everything you touch is just quality. From the leather on the seats and the door cards to the Alcantara, the microfiber headlining, even these shift paddles. Real metal, much larger than you'd find in, say, an R8 or a 911, and weirdly, much more satisfying too. Even the gear lever here is really quite nice to operate, very intuitive, and does the job perfectly. The pedals are beautiful, nicely styled, but also functional. The wheel itself, surprisingly small in the hand. It may look perforated, but it's not. The side grips have dimples in them like a golf ball for better grip. The screen here is a minimalist masterpiece with a really nice touch. An LFA-inspired physical piece that moves from side to side, giving you a couple of options for the menu. Another LFA influence can be seen up here with the controls for your traction and your driving modes. Twist it, bop it, it's brilliant. So interactive, so tactile, so simple and well designed. Form and function meeting and getting on like a house on fire. This is how it's done. These sports seats in this car are not just beautiful to look at, but they're also very supportive, really quite comfortable over long distances. They've got just about enough adjustment, not million weight, but they do the job, and they have both heating and ventilation, which when it's as warm as it is now, I very much do appreciate. For petrolhead brownie points, there's even a smattering of carbon fibre in both traditional weaved and forged forms. You've got some on the door sill here, on the roof, in the doors, and even the boot as well. And now, in the interest of being fair and balanced, let's discuss a couple of the reasons why you haven't been buying LC500s. At 4.77 metres, it's longer than an Aston Martin DB11, but the back seats are just as useless. And despite all that carbon fibre and a 10 kilo weight reduction for 2021, it's still no lightweight. Over 1.9 tonnes and close to 2 for the hybrid. Combine those figures with that engine, and you'll find a car that will never impress in a car wow drag race. You've probably also been told that the infotainment is impossible to use. It's not. That the gearbox has too many gears. It does, 10 of them, and that it's too expensive. The last point I find particularly baffling, and it's one that I encountered a lot when I drove the LC convertible, because for me, this is actually reason number 4 why you should be buying one. Unsurprisingly, the price of the LC has gone up since its introduction, but mercifully, the model lineup is very simple. The car starts at around £86,000, whether you go for the V8 or the hybrid. The difference is only a couple of £100. And for that, you get a car with a glass panoramic roof, 20-inch wheels, and a full leather interior. £92,000 gets you the Sport Pack car that comes with 21-inch wheels, a carbon roof, and a half Alcantara interior. This is a Sport Pack Plus model, and limited editions aside, it is the top of the line. It costs £97,000, and over the Sport Pack gets you a pop-up rear spoiler, rear wheel steer, a Torsen limited slip differential at the back, the carbon fibre side sills, and variable ratio electric power steering. There are only 2 options really to choose from: the Mark Levinson reference 13-speaker HIFI at £1,250, well worth having, and a colour heads-up display combined oddly with a key card to get into it. I don't know why you'd want that, but I do want the heads-up display, and that at £1,000 is another option worth having, bringing the total of this car, fully loaded including the paint, only £500, to just about £100,000. That, of course, sounds like a lot of money, because it is, but unfortunately, £100,000 doesn't go anywhere near as far as it used to. For example, that would get you a no-options 911 Carrera 2S. An Aston Martin V8 Vantage costs £20,000 more, and inside feels like £20,000 less. A Ferrari Roma is faster, newer, and to some much more desirable, but is also double the money. Just about the only car which can compete in value terms is the Jaguar F-Type, which for the 450 horsepower version is about £15,000 to £20,000 cheaper, or for the same money as this, you can have the all-singing, all-dancing F-Type 575. And before we get on to point number 5, let's talk about one of the real strengths of the LC500, the Lexus dealer network. I've only been into a Lexus dealership twice, but I remember both visits very well, because they were actually pleasant. And anyone who's been into a car dealership before will know just how rare that is. More than that, on both occasions, I turned up unannounced and was asking difficult questions about an expensive car, namely an LC500. And that's exactly the sort of scenario where you would more or less expect to be brushed off by the staff. However, on both occasions, I was made to feel not just welcome, but like I'd been shopping there for 20 years. It was an amazing experience, and I totally got why Lexus customers were quite so loyal. I should also mention the amazing warranty that these cars have. If you buy any LC500, in fact, any Lexus or Toyota, you can benefit from what they call their Relax program. In other words, take it to your main dealer for servicing, even if you didn't buy it from them, and provided the car is good, they will automatically top up your warranty with another 1 year and 10,000 miles, up to 10 years and 100,000 miles. That is fantastic. Tempted yet? I know what you're thinking, James. Yes, it's lovely, very pretty car. You make a decent case for it, but ultimately some fancy shapes and posh leather and a smile at the dealership is unlikely to coax your average Jag or Porsche owner out of their cars when they drive so well. This is a Lexus. Surely it can't be that good. Well, happily, that is point number 5. Now, allow me to let you into a little secret. If I am to like any car over £30,000, it has to be something special. The reasoning for that is quite simple. Nobody needs a car worth more than £30,000. You may want cars more than £30,000, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're all human beings, we covet shiny things, but you don't need one. In truth, I actually used to say about £20,000 was the threshold, but in the last few years, car prices across the board have gone up. Some people want an EV or a hybrid, and they naturally cost a little bit more. But 30k, I think, is more than adequate to get yourself into something very, very nice. For that kind of money, you can get yourself into a BMW M3, a 330d if you want something more economical, a 7 Series if you want something more luxurious, an S-Class, a Lexus LS, a Range Rover, a Fiat Panda, an Abarth 595 if you're that way inclined. There is a whole host of cars, good cars, available to people with £30,000 to spend. And if you haven't got that much, there's still a load of great cars. I've just got out of a Saab convertible. It was 1,100 quid, and I had a great time. In fact, with this weather, I wish I was still in it. Now, in order to justify a car being more than £30,000, it doesn't have to be the sort of thing that sets your hair on fire. No. Being special can be more than just the driving experience, and already the Lexus LC500 scores highly because, as mentioned earlier, you sit yourself in here and you do feel like you're in something just a little bit different. Happily, the driving experience also delivers. That is not to say this is a car without fault, and it does have a few. The gearbox does infuriate. If you leave it to its own devices and you're in more or less any mode, you find it shuffling cogs annoyingly frequently, and it's not the smoothest at doing so. Visibility is also a little bit of a mixed bag. Out the front, that bonnet is pretty wide and can be a little bit tricky to place because it drops away into nothingness. To the side, it's not so bad, but the rear 3/4 is a little bit limited. However, straight behind you is okay. Happily, the car has plenty of sensors and things like that, so parking it isn't too tricky. And though it is a long car, it's not super long, it's not daunting, you can put it in a regular space. The doors are pretty wide, but they also hold themselves at more or less any angle you want, which means getting in and out in a car park isn't fraught with danger. This car also achieves something that so many set out to, and yet so few succeed at. It's a real GT car. Many things badged as such are really just sports cars with a somewhat generous boot, and they don't all have that either. Particularly now, as we've become more obsessed with lap times and the like, manufacturers are always inclined to try and make their cars a little bit stiffer, a little bit what they call sportier than they really need to be. The fact is, on the road, particularly on a British road, you don't want a super stiff car. It's just not pleasant. This is miraculous. It is sublime. At very low speeds around town and whatnot with really rough surfaces, it does struggle just a little bit because it's trying to contain so much mass. I don't really remember the early LC500 being much of a bone shaker, but this takes it to another level. It's fabulous. Handily, though it has a somewhat thirsty V8, 22 to 24 has been my average MPG, Lexus have fitted it with a proper sized fuel tank, just over 80 litres, meaning you can do a pretty good distance between fill-ups. And then, when you find yourself on a fun bit of road, whack the car into manual, set it to Sport S+, and it comes alive. Automatic mode, it's a little bit of a low light. In manual, the gearbox here is brilliant. It doesn't quite have the bite of, say, a dual clutch, but as autos go, it's fantastic. And this is a very typically Japanese thing. As far as I'm aware, no other car received this 10-speed. In fact, even the hybrid LC500 doesn't have this 10-speed unit. This is the only car that ever got it, and the cost of developing a gearbox is massive. This one is so good, they should be putting it in everything. It's got a real snap on the upshift, and the downshifts. The only disappointment here is that when I had the convertible, those little cracks on the downshift you can really hear, but in the coupe, you're just a little bit isolated from them. So unless you're really listening carefully, you can't hear them. And that's a shame, because that's one of the all-time great soundtracks. It's so smooth, it's so refined, but it's also got that edge to it you'd expect from a V8. Honestly, unless you're just cruising about, take the car out of drive, put it into manual, and enjoy the gearbox, enjoy the drive. Likewise, with the engine, yeah, sure, it just doesn't have that much firepower below about 3.5 grand, but that just gives you a reason to take it beyond. I would also love it to rev to 8,000 RPM as well, but that's just not its way. It's not that kind of engine. Enjoy it for what it is, rather than bemoaning it for what it isn't. And then we get on to the real surprise of this package, the steering. You would expect anything that has variable ratio electric power steering to just be unpleasant, because those are all bywords for nasty steering with no feel. But this is really quite something. At low speeds, there's a nice sense of weighting about it. It turns in really sharp. The rear wheel steer is always there, particularly at lower speeds. You can feel its presence, and it makes this a much more wieldy car than it would otherwise be. Even for little stuff like this, you turn around and you feel that back end just helping you around. A little bit unsettling if you're not used to it, but you do quickly adjust to it. It is a real tragedy Lexus never made an LCF, because I think that would have been a truly remarkable car, a real halo, and one a lot more accessible than the old LFA. If you see this car as perhaps the middle of the range, the SL500 equivalent, rather than the SL63, you begin to wonder just how they managed to make it quite as good as they have. As soon as this skip lorry, which has felt it appropriate to take up an entire road and create a traffic jam, has got out of our way, I'll give this car one last blast, and then we'll draw our conclusions. It is an absolute riot, this car. No, it's not scalpel sharp like a GT3 or anything, but it's not meant to be. In fact, it would be a worse car if it were. Even in its Sport S Plus setting, it's still quite comfortable. In fact, in some sections of the road, you might call it a little bit too soft. But I don't mind that. That's a novelty these days. It means you just enjoy it. The fact you have so many ratios to choose from and a red line that isn't that high means you get to enjoy that gearbox all the more often too. It even has a little bit of texture and feel coming through the wheel, most unexpected. The one big dynamic disappointment of this car is the grip. On the exit from many a bend, the traction control light has lit up when I really didn't expect it to. It's 21 degrees today, it's bone dry. There should be no trouble whatsoever getting all of the power down. It's not like there's masses and masses of it anyway. I don't know if it's a function of the tyres, but it shouldn't be. They're big, wide 285 section tyres that are pretty fresh. Or it could be a function of the rear wheel steer. I don't recall any other LC500 being this way. You can also tell this isn't the traction control calling wolf, because the car does seem to get a little bit upset. And unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a sort of halfway house mode for it. I would use that if there were. All I seem to have is off and snow. There's no snow today, and I'm not going to turn it off because it already feels a little bit skittish, and I don't want to find out if the traction has actually been saving me this whole time. Though not award-winning, the pedal has a decent feel, the brakes work well enough, and you're never in any doubt of their ability to bring the car to a stop. I'm sure on track you would find their limit quickly, but then you could say that for the rest of this car. Don't take it on track. Seriously. The simple truth is, many people will have convinced themselves that most of the time they are driving a car 9/10. They are at the ragged edge, taking it to the max, clipping every apex. But in truth, you're likely to be driving more at 7/10 or actually 3/10. You don't always get the opportunity to give a car hell for leather. By having slightly lower overall limits, you can get to 9/10 in this car quicker. It's still very enjoyable, and crucially for me, compared with any of the current generation of 911, this is a vastly more enjoyable car at the 3/10 mark. Even sat behind the skip lorry, this is a fine place to be. I wouldn't have the black Alcantara and leather interior because honestly, of all the options available, it is the least special and the most dull. They do a beautiful sort of tan, I think they call it ochre. There's also a red as well. The full semi-aniline interiors are spectacular and well worth having. The car does have enough quirks and features that it was never destined to sell in 911-like numbers. That, curiously, has turned into part of the appeal. I do, however, believe it did deserve to sell just a little bit better. I am a big fan of cars with character, and the LC500 has that in spades. Let's be honest here, saying a car has character is more often than not a backhanded compliment. It's a way of saying it's pretty and sounds good, but atrociously built, and the gear lever will come off in your hand. The LC500 isn't like that. It has compromises, for sure, and there are things you will have to live with, but none of them for me are deal breakers, and the rest of the package more than makes up for it. So if you're thinking of an Aston Martin, DB9, DB11, V8 Vantage, a Porsche 911, a Porsche Cayman, a Ferrari Roma, even a Portofino or a Jaguar F-Type XK, do yourself a favour. Pop down to your Lexus dealer, try one of these. You may not buy the car, but I guarantee you'll remember it. Anyway, a huge thank you to Lexus UK for lending me this car, which is about to be defleeted, so this is probably its last appearance on social media. A huge thank you to you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.